Thank you very much for joining us today, Nicholas Menling of GIZ, to discuss the Regional Cooperation Program for the Sustainable Management of Mineral Resources in the Andean region. I think you have a lot to tell us about how technology and sustainability stakes can be combined for better and more positive impact of mining for all. And thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Well, thanks a lot for the invite. Let me try and share my screen. Okay, and let me know once you see it.
Perfect.
Excellent. So yeah, I will do a short talk about some of the work that we've been doing here, which I think, well, our focus was on the Andean region, but I think is relevant for other countries as well. And the title of the presentation is Avoiding the Not in My Backyard Backlash by Merging Technology and Sustainability Drivers to Benefit Mining Regions. Just to give a little bit of context and background to where we're coming from. So you already mentioned the project that I work at, which is a mouthful. So we abbreviate it to MINSES. And it's a German cooperation project together with the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, here in the region. And that's why I'm also greeting you from Santiago de Chile today. We work in the 6 countries that you see in the map in the middle of the slide. And apart from working with the UN here in the region, we also work with the BGR, which is the Federal Geosciences Institute for Natural Resources in Germany. And as a result of this cooperation between the 3 organizations, we cover a lot of thematics, which you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, some of the topics that we cover. Today, I will focus a little bit on the orange tab that you see there on innovation and technology transfer, and mix it in a little bit with the sustainable mineral supply chains discussion. When maybe also worth highlighting that depending on the field and area of work, we work with different stakeholders. So with governments, a big focus on laws and regulations. With civil society, in the last years, we've had a focus on the mineral supply chain discussions that are happening in off-taker countries and ESG indicators, and trying to think through how to use these trends to also inform their advocacy strategies. With the private sector, we've been doing a lot around voluntary sustainability initiative, and trying to link them with some of the actions that they're doing on the ground to improve development outcomes, and also with academia. So we try, apart from, let's say, mix them and have them talk to each other depending on the areas of work, we choose whom we work with. But as I mentioned, the focus of today, I want to focus a little bit on the work that we've been doing around new technologies in the mining sector. And this is part of a broader work that has been done by the IGF, which is called New Tech, New Deal. And I encourage you to have a look at that on the IGF website. We essentially supplemented the work that they've been doing, which essentially tries to assess the technology impacts on mining countries. We supplemented with an analysis here in the region. And what we did together with CESCO is to bring together stakeholders from the Andean region and think through in working groups what the impacts may be. What we did here, and which I think is quite interesting and relevant, is divide the stakeholders or the impacts that stakeholders felt where you would see them. So trying to think through what are the impacts at the local level around mine sites. What are the impacts on mining capitals, like here Antofagasta, for example, and what are the impacts on metropolitan regions? And the picture emerged relatively quickly, which I think also makes a lot of sense, that at the local level, probably the adverse impacts in terms of job losses, both in terms of direct employment, but also procurement, is the drawbacks are larger because the skill sets required for the mine of the future might not be available where mining occurs, and the procurement of goods are often linked to people working at the mine site. So if now fewer people are working at the mine site, then, for example, procuring foods or other or uniforms, for example, is not going to be possible, which in many countries are linked to local procurement. And the impacts are probably different at mining capitals and metropolitan areas like Santiago de Chile, where technology firms and startups have a potential to now play a role in the sector. So a lot more positive if you go to metropolitan areas. And then another not surprising result of that work is that if you coordinate some of this transition with public policies and work together within companies, but also with the public sector, you probably can create a lot higher value than if each one works on their own and doesn't prepare for this transitions. One other conclusion, which I think is interesting from that work, was that it makes sense to take a more holistic view of the technology drivers and merge them with some of the sustainability drivers that we're seeing in the mining space. And for that, in a second phase, we picked out the 5 areas that are highlighted on the right-hand side of the slide, which essentially is shared use water infrastructure investment, nature-based solutions, electrifying mine trucks, circular economy issues, and carbon clubs within the region. And these essentially, what we then did is to create working groups within these 5 fields to identify opportunities in the Andean region, to see what the potential is in working groups that were composed of experts on the topic with experts or people working in the mining sector. And the results from this will be published shortly, but I will give you a brief sneak peek of some of the findings. So and I'll highlight 3 here. One was on shared use water infrastructure investments. So as I mentioned before, one of the drawbacks of the digitalization and automation of the sector may be that in mining regions, you'll have less direct employment and less indirect employment through procurement. But if you take new approaches, especially here between Santiago de Chile and Lima, which is very dry and one of the biggest copper producing regions in the world, you see that there are a lot of desalination plants in the pipeline that are linked to mining projects. And if you could coordinate these and ensure that these investments not only serve the mine site, but can also serve other actors where mining occurs, then you have a potential to actually create a lot of new work opportunities, particularly in the agriculture and husbandry sectors. So by essentially merging, this sustainability strand with some of the strategies of how to develop new projects here in the north of where I'm sitting, there is potential to create a lot more employment than a mine site could offer, or could ever offer. A second example around circular economy comes from a company here that produces grinding balls, which are used to crush minerals and crush rocks to get out the minerals. And there it was found that the demand for these is going to increase significantly in the coming years. And by using some of the metals and materials that are being discarded by the mining sector, you could actually also provide a lot of the raw input for creating these grinding balls from the region, thereby pushing the agenda on the circular economy topic. And at the regional level, the electrification of mining trucks, what I think is a very interesting opportunity is that it was estimated that about 3,500 large-scale mining trucks operated in Peru and Chile alone, which is a significant proportion of trucks in the world in general. And so there may be opportunities to retrofit some of these here in the region or assemble them, because that part of the value chain needs to be very context specific of where the mine trucks operate. So there is also a niche, you know, for potentially creating new economic opportunities. And so by merging essentially these sustainability drivers and the digitalization drivers, you suddenly see new opportunities that could be created at the local, national, but also at the regional level here in the region. And so I thought, I think, you know, this is probably the way that we need to go, because I think, you know, the message that has been sent out that mining is required to drive forward the energy transition because of the minerals that are needed, and needs to be complemented by showing that future mining projects contribute to economic development, sustainable economic development where mining occurs, to obtain or retain the social license to operate, which in many of the countries here in the Andean region is currently, you know, being disputed whether the mining sector is really the way to go in future years. So I'll stop there, and I realize I went a little bit over my 10 minutes, but I hope it was useful.
Thanks very much, Nick. I don't think you went over that much. I mean, first of all, it's very positive to note that we can really work from the mining sector to develop an entire other set of industries and jobs. A couple of points that you mentioned, I thought really warrant perhaps a little bit more in-depth comments from you. The first one is you mentioned the fact that there's all these opportunities, but they need to happen in coordination with the public sector for the regulatory environment to allow for these. But also, I presume they require some coordination with other industries and other actors, you know, outside of the mining sector. So how do you build those bridges? And are there any lessons or elements of interest that you can observe in your region that you think could be pertinent worldwide to actually spread this kind of positive reindustrialization work around the mining sector?
Yeah, I think, I mean, so to go back to the three examples that were highlighted, you know, to explain some of the coordination that is needed. And that's essentially the other big outcome, both of the first component of work, as how to manage this transition for those that may lose jobs, and create, you know, the know-how that is needed for the new jobs. It requires also coordination amongst companies and with the public sector, but also for the second piece. So maybe going back to the examples that were highlighted. For the shared use water infrastructure investment, I mean, it's not really a new technology, but it is a new approach, I think, of how mining has been done, at least here in the north of Chile and south of Peru, whereby, you know, each one got their license to build their desalination plant, and then they operate that. And in this approach, it requires a territorial view. It requires the public sector essentially coordinating the different actors to ensure that access rights are coordinated, tariffs are coordinated, and then mining companies essentially will also have to coordinate if, you know, 2 or 3 projects are in the pipeline, that they sit together and think through how to develop their water infrastructure instead of each one doing it by him or herself. Similar with the circular economy topic. So right now, some of the laws and regulations here in the regions are not actually designed that you can take some of the residues that are used in mining. You can't use them as inputs in other industries. So you first need a legal framework, and again, you basically need a stock take, because a lot of these solutions only work at scale. So if one mining company does it, it doesn't really work. But if you have a conglomerate of mining companies, then you may have enough inputs for materials needed, for example, for the grinding balls. So there again, you need the mix between regulation and coordination between the actors. And well, I think in all these different niches and examples that we worked on, that was one of the main message, that the individual subtopics require coordination, and then at the broader scale, you also need to put these dots together to ultimately explain how mining as its whole, because the public is not interested in each of these specificities. They're basically interested, okay, what is in it for us? Why should we support this sector? So then I think one of the things that we've been trying to do with this work is to, at the end, again, put it together to explain how these different components fit together to promote, for mining to be a generator of economic development where mining occurs.
And do you feel that there is a capacity constraint, or do you feel that the capacity is there? It's a question of linking all these areas, which are usually dealt with by separate departments, separate types of companies. Is there enough understanding of each other's sector to be able to work across those silos at the moment, even in government?
Yeah, I think I mean, it's nothing new, right? I think that the problems have gotten more complex, and therefore more of it is needed. But I think it's always been difficult to work across sectors. And at least here in the region, I don't think we've made great progress in that. I think there is talk about doing more of that. In practice, I think it's very difficult because, I think ultimately each one is in their own specific niche and understands that niche and wants to work in that niche. And then going back to a group that may talk about other things seem a bit of a waste of time. But especially, I mean, for policymakers across different ministries, you have that problem. I think in mining companies of different departments, you have that problem. So it's not an easy task, but I don't see how we can solve the broader issue of social acceptance of the sector without giving a package that to the broader public to explain how mining can contribute to well-being. And so I think it will be needed, and it will be forced onto mining companies and governments in the years to come.
And there's another stakeholder group, which I think also plays a role now in changing this mindset. Investors in mining companies are clearly understanding that mining is shifting as an industry. Sometimes they're even pushing that shift. But the rest of the mineral supply chain is also now really putting a lot of scrutiny on the mining sector, whether we're talking about, all of the environmental and human rights due diligence, or more generally, a real willingness to ensure that mining is able to meet the demand and the challenges of the green energy transition and a much more responsible view of the entire mineral supply chain. So are you connecting this, development approach with how investors or the mineral supply chains are changing their own expectations of mining?
Yeah, I think, here in the region, I think that has been one of the most interesting changes that we've seen, is essentially off-takers, either due to voluntary standards, but also due to regulations in countries like Germany or Europe that are putting in place due diligence regulations, not only on conflict minerals, but more broadly on due diligence about human rights in their value chain. So you do suddenly see a change here in the region because off-takers are placing more importance on it. And I think, you've seen you've seen certification schemes like Copper Mark or IRMA or other voluntary standards being implemented, and because I think, you know, off-takers are requiring, which is a very positive development, I think. I think the next step, and this goes a little bit of how to link, let's say this part of the work with the due diligence work is, and you know, a lot of the due diligence work is focused on negative externalities. And I think the next step is to think through, okay, how can we not only ensure that the negative externalities are addressed, but that the mining sector becomes a contributor to economic development where it occurs. And that to me is kind of the next step here, because if you only focus on the negative things, then you will still not have the social acceptance where mining occurs. Because I mean, if I right now live next to a construction site, and so they try to minimize the noise, they try to minimize, you know, the trucks that are on the road, but I still don't want the construction site to be next to me. So I can just imagine if this would be a never-ending construction site and I would never get something out of it, that, you know, it must feel similar to mining impacted communities, that, you know, ultimately the goal for them is to see the positive impact apart from addressing the negative impact.
And I think that's exactly the point of discussing mining and the just transition as a single topic, because they are intrinsically linked. Well, Nicholas, thank you so much for this discussion, and we look forward to hearing more from Minsus, and we'll look forward to your next publication, and thanks for the sneak peek.
Great. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Much
appreciated.
appreciated.
Thank you very much.